January 5th, 2018, at a debate in the United Nations Security Council on Iran, and the protests that have erupted in Iran, one of the leaders, one of the ambassadors said, well, why are we discussing Iran? Why aren't we discussing Black Lives Matter and what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, for example? I mean, why are we talking about the repression of protesters in Iran? Should we be talking about the repression of protesters in North America, the United States of America? And as I read that article, I was saying, well, yeah, that's a very good question. But then I began to think that, yeah, the problem is, despite the heroic efforts of the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter, those are still two groups that don't necessarily have majority sway in our community, so to speak. They're not as well organized, for example, or as well funded as the NAACP. And I would say that in order to finally end this U.S. project of white supremacy, what was said at the United Nations on January 5th, 2018, that is to say a debate about Ferguson, Missouri, and about Black Lives Matter, needs to become common, not some sort of black swan event, which is what it is today. Because we're still only about 13% of the population. We're still mostly centered in major cities and not necessarily represented in the Rocky Mountain West, for example, which is oftentimes where conservatism has a headquarters. I'm sure you know about the attempt in Idaho, for example, to establish a so-called white homeland. So we have to organize globally and internationally, but as of today, I don't really see that happening. Many of our folk are more concerned about improving our position within this white supremacist project more so than overthrowing it. And with regard to the question of whether or not people are identifying themselves as part of a larger African community worldwide, a larger diaspora community, I would have to say that probably not. And this is ironic because right now, with the advancement of technology, you can communicate with people all over the world within seconds. You can fly with supersonic transport nonstop to Cape Town in 16 hours, 17 hours. And yet, despite the ability to connect technologically and scientifically, I don't really see that happening. And I think part of it's a result of the post-1954 dispensation. That is to say, this idea that we were being accepted as U.S. nationals and U.S. citizens and U.S. nationals allowed the State Department to handle global relations. Even though before we were accepted as, supposedly accepted as U.S. nationals, of course, you had our intellectuals like Du Bois, Robeson, Frederick Douglass, Martin Delany, et cetera. They were traveling globally, trying to organize. And so that's part of what needs to be unpacked today, and it might be unpacked for us, because my own opinion is that the post-1954 dispensation was not a final settlement of our plight. It was like a truce. And like any truce, it can be overthrown when either party decides that the conditions that led to the truce no longer obtain. And what might be happening to us today is that the truce is being overthrown, which is part of the reason why you may be making this movie. Because you sense that, we're entering this new phase and this new stage, and so we need clarity in terms of how we got to this point.